So I'm Nancy Wagstein. I'm occupying there are slots on the board, as you may know, for various prescribed roles. So I'm occupying the Human Services Budget Organization Budget Advocacy role.
I'm Lisa Neary. I'm the General Counsel at IBO.
Mark Shaw from City University, and the former City Budget Director slot.
Ernest Logan, Council of School Supervisors and Administrators in the union slot.
I'm Greg Walker. I lead corporate development at Sony. I'm in a for-profit slot.
Don Boyd, Rockefeller Institute of Government, a budget expert slot.
Deborah Golby, I'm from Hunter College. I'm in the chair of an economics slot, and I know what you mean about 3 years.
Being a chair might be more difficult than being a dean.
Okay, Ronnie Lowenstein. I've been director of IBO for actually quite some time now.
All right, so can we could go around. One of the things to know, Michelle, is that this is an open meeting. As you can see, it's being recorded. And we also have, as is it ex officio members? Lisa, the representatives of the elected officials?
Yeah, they're just representatives
and
from
so
the
they,
appointing officials.
right, so
offices.
they generally are invited, and many of them come representing their elected official, and maybe we'll just say.
Good morning. I'm Amber Green, the Director of Policy for Public Advocate James.
I'm Ray DeMonaco from IBO.
Michael Jacobs, IBO. Paul Lopato, IBO. George Sweeting, IBO.
Vladimir Martinez, a Director of Budget from the Manhattan Borough President's Office.
Saritas Romanian, IBO.
Elizabeth Brown, IBO.
Doug Turetsky, IBO.
Frank Basilico, IBO.
Okay, so we're done. And these are the.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Yeah. And so, okay, we just approved the minutes. We don't have to go through that. And now, as I said, Ronnie will give her report, which is usually how we start these meetings, and then we're going to have a discussion of the mayor's preliminary budget, which is on a lot of people's minds.
Okay, thank you. The director's report today is going to be really brief, and it's going to be basically an institutional mea culpa. Some of you may know that we put out a report on the prevailing wages last month. It garnered a lot of attention because it's an important issue. You may recall that the mayor's affordable housing plan depends. The mayor was counting on the enactment of a new version of the 421A program to boost his affordable housing goals. And at the 11th hour, the governor came in and said that he wouldn't sign the legislation unless the mayor, well, the real estate industry, not even the mayor, the real estate industry and the unions reached agreement on a prevailing wage for affordable housing. Those negotiations were going on. There were questions about the extent to which having to pay prevailing wages was going to boost the cost of building the units. And we stepped in and, using data largely from HPD, did the study, came out before the deadline that the governor had given to reach agreement. No agreement was reached, but we had been meeting with various interest groups and talking to people about the study. And in one of the meetings with a group that represents affordable housing developers, one of the developers asked about a project, one of his projects, and was surprised to see that it wasn't on the list of prevailing wage projects that we were using in the study. That led to a great deal of going through the data and discussions with HPD. The variable, whether or not a project paid prevailing wages is actually largely monitored by HPD, and we had taken that variable and just used HPD's list of what projects had prevailing wages under federal law and which didn't. And it turned out the list was wrong. There were 12 projects that should have been identified as having prevailing wages that were not. The final sample consisted of 69 prevailing wage projects, so you can see that 12 makes a big difference. 69 projects with about 6,000 units out of a total of 211 projects with about 20,000 units. Is that something like that? And the results changed substantially. The final results showed that requirements for prevailing wages would increase the total costs of building by about 23%, which was about twice what we had estimated the first time. So we released that on Tuesday. We were also in touch with all the elected officials who had used the data, the reporters who had reported on it, everybody else we could think of. And that was released yesterday. I think it was a good piece of work. I still think it's a good piece of work. I think it was reasonable to rely upon HPD's list. They do monitor them. But mistakes happen, and I think one of the strengths of IBO is that when mistakes happen, we take a deep breath and we go out and correct, and that's what we did. And questions?
I think that's always been an issue, Ronnie, is that we've always had to rely on the city agency to provide us with the data, whether it was education, when we've had some issues with education. I don't know a way around that, and the only way that we're going to find out that the data that we have that's incorrect is when people in the agency or somebody who's dealing with the agency tells us that something is wrong, as we've had happen in education. So I think the IBO has done an exceptional job of correcting that, finding out that there was an error, correcting it, and coming back. And I think that's what makes us independent.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did HPD review it at all?
Oh, yeah. HPD has been going through the administrative records we have for each project. And yeah, what was surprising was, at least to me, was that the data people at HPD within the commissioner's office weren't really communicating with the enforcement people who were, I think, largely working with paper.
Oh, that's not surprising.
So, one guy's data, one guy's enforcement, and...
Right.
I should also say, HPD reviewed the paper before it went in.
Oh, yes.
Before the report.
Oh, both times.
Both times.
Both times, absolutely.
Oh.
Yeah.
Does anybody audit their data?
Well, we did.
I guess the good news is that it didn't affect the outcome.
No, it absolutely did not affect the outcome. Although, you would have thought that given the really low estimate we came out the first time, it might have, it could have potentially led to an agreement that they may or may not have regretted later, yeah.
Well, from what I read in this morning's Times, HPD's been under a lot of pressure about the zoning stuff, so maybe they were distracted.
Yeah, I think HPD's under a great deal of pressure, yes.
As far
Wait,
as
Diana, before we
course.
continue, since you came in, Diana Reyna is representing the Brooklyn Borough President and is the Deputy Borough President of Brooklyn, former City Council member. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. I just want to commend IBO for this particular exercise because this is remarkable and it's a program that's completely under many iterations, and the understanding that we want to make sure that we have a compliant program, right? Without these discoveries, we won't improve them. Part of what I wanted to ask, how is HPD participating in the open data exercise of the City of New York? Is this data part of the open data?
Well,
Please, this is the primary author. Oh, no, one, okay, the
Supervisor.
The author is Sarah Stefanski.
So the data point about whether a project is prevailing wage is part of the open data. The other data that we used on cost is not. So we got that from HPD. We also went to HPD. Not all of the data that we used is part of open data. There's some weird rules about what's included. So not everything that is counted towards the mayor's affordable housing goal is part of open data. So we went to HPD and got this flag from them for the other ones, but this flag on prevailing wage is actually part of the open data.
And was the auditing policy as far as, how often is auditing occurring under this program? And whether or not there was annual audits or every 5-year audits,
Do you mean of the data or of
Yeah.
the actual monitoring?
Actually, correct, the compliance.
That I don't know how often that happens.
No, it's a good question, but it's one that we could direct to HPD for you if you like.
I would appreciate that. We're just trying to understand because I can't imagine that this is not a center core issue to what is making sure that compliance is being reached because the lack of oversight or flagrant mistakes that are occurring, and these are not small contracts, these are massive contracts. So I appreciate that communication.
Good. Okay.
Okay, anything else, Ronnie?
No, we can move on.
Okay, so just for I think the benefit of our newest member, who may not be as steeped in this, since you came from Washington, maybe, Ronnie, you could, or someone else can talk about the schedule of the city's budget process and where the mayor's preliminary budget fits in with the approval process and adoption process, and
Good point.
where we are now.
Okay. The mayor gets 2 cracks at the budget. The first is preliminary budget, which typically comes out in January, and then the mayor's executive budget, which comes out in May. April or May?
End of-
Late
yeah,
April.
End of-
Until they change the date, at which point they typically produce it in May. And the difference is, think of the preliminary budget as just that. It's a trial balloon, the council does extensive hearings, the administration responds, then the executive budget comes out, and there's another round of hearings and some degree of response, and then the budget is invariably adopted by the end of June. We have our own calendar, which when the charter tells us that we should be doing reports, the first of our reports in the budget season is called the Fiscal Outlook Report, and we put it out in December. And we see that as the What's Coming Up report. If policies don't change, here's how things look. Then we put out a report on the mayor's preliminary budget, which isn't due until middle of March, but we'll be putting out our numbers this year, the first week of March, timed to the first day of the council hearings. We testify on the first day of hearings, and so all of our numbers have to be complete even if the text isn't fully in place. And our report will have the big picture, economics, revenues, comparisons with the administration's numbers, and also look at specific issues that the mayor and at times the council has raised with regard to the preliminary. Having said that, we put out our report on the fiscal outlook in December. And actually, do you have the, where is the report? No, I'm actually looking for the presentation because I can actually segue into it if we can get it up. Thanks. While that's happening, let me say that we assumed that there'd be a lot of interest in the mayor's preliminary budget. I think that's reasonable. But we don't have our numbers yet. So we thought that perhaps the best thing we could do here was provide a little bit of background information and then talk about the issues, some of the issues that have been raised. We don't have our numbers. We'll be looking at not the numbers that we're putting out the first week of March, but rather the numbers that we put out back in December and contrasting them to what the mayor put out in January. And because this is going to be not a hugely formal presentation, we've asked IBO's team leaders to just stand up and talk about some of the issues that they're seeing. Within the preliminary, George has taken a close look at some of what's been coming from Albany, which should be an interesting discussion. And what we'd like to do is really have people participate. I know everybody typically does jump in here, but even more so. So, questions, comments, thoughts are much appreciated, and we'll try to figure out how to keep it going despite that. So I was selected to just do the big picture very quickly, and then I was going to talk about an issue, kick it off by talking about an issue that the mayor raised during his preliminary budget presentation, which is we're about to go into recession or something like that. He was very foreboding. So let me just give you the background. The first slide compares our economic forecast from December to OMB's preliminary budget forecast from January. And if you look at the big variables like real inflation-adjusted growth in U.S. output, our forecasts are actually very much the same. Until you get to the very end of the forecast period, they're actually unusually the same. We're expecting GDP to continue to chug along. There is definitely no recession in that outlook. And if you look at the corresponding number for the New York City economy, which is on the lower part of the panel, for the first couple of years, actually throughout, again, GCP growth looks, those two forecasts are unusually close.
So is that unusual? Do they usually diverge?
Yeah, we're almost always, not always, but almost always higher in terms of the basic forecast numbers. The other variable I'd like you to take a look at is local employment growth. We finished up 2015 very strongly. In fact, Q4 employment growth in New York City was the strongest it's been in quite some time. Right now it looks, and this is an estimate still, like the city added 100,000 jobs for the whole of 2015. Which is the second highest total on record, and records go back to the 50s. Moreover, that employment growth was spread widely among a number of different industries. It's not just concentrated in the low-paying retail and leisure and tourism. Financial sector started adding jobs again, which is great. So it's widespread. There are lots of jobs, and moreover, those numbers are going to be revised shortly. Typically, the Labor Department revises the numbers in March because they have actually a complete enumeration of who's in the labor force based upon forms that have to be filled out for unemployment insurance. So it takes a while for them to actually feed that through the system, and the preliminary numbers that come out are based upon their estimates based upon surveys. But based upon the numbers that are out so far, it seems likely that 100,000 number is going to go up. And moreover, the number for the previous year, which was 120,000, which was the highest, may well be revised up as well.
Ronnie, are you saying that the job growth is also showing up in the financial sector again?
Yeah. Yeah, after a couple of years of losses, it looks like there is once again job growth.
Higher paid jobs again back into this.
Although early tea leaves suggest it's not going to be a great bonus season, which is happening now.
Next question.
I mean, by my perspectives, it's great. But yeah.
So GCP is obviously growing much slower than GDP. Was that different when you had the booming job growth? Were we closer to the nation at that point, or is the slowdown because of the employment slowdown?
I don't think. Can you answer that, George? We haven't actually been highlighting GCP in our forecasts. It's a share down number, and there is no official forecast of gross city product. And so the controller has one, and the administration has one, and probably everyone here has one. But yeah,
slower because in the U.S. economy's population workforce can grow a lot faster than the cities can, only because we're a dense city. So that's typically the case.
But assuming things play out the way we expect, this will be the 5th consecutive year that that city employment has grown by more than 2%, which is extraordinary.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
How does that compare to the growth in the population of working age folks in whatever you consider your employment catchment area, which is different from the city, of course?
Oh, yeah. And I don't have an answer to that. Do you, Michael?
I
I should say Michael is our team leader in economics and revenue.
don't know the exact answer to the working age population, but one thing that's been different on the local level is that labor force participation among those people has been not trending downward to the extent it has in the United States as a whole, and that's obviously a positive factor for the local economy, for output and employment.
Okay.
So.
It's actually
I mean,
going up,
that's the
hasn't
better
it?
way of asking the question anyway.
It was going up,
and
then it
now
leveled off,
it's
and-
we don't know what it's doing right
Okay.
now. It seems to the upward trend seems to have stopped. Whether that it resumes, we don't know yet.
Although the trend growth is faster, it's still at a lower level. Labor force participation in the city is lower than it.
Yeah, but it's like a percentage point at this point. It's not a big
It's
difference
narrow,
anymore.
It's narrow, but we did start.
I notice in your numbers you have the 10-year treasury. Are the numbers that you have in your report, is that what you think the 10-year is going to be each of those years? Or is that the growth?
No, that's the rate.
That's a
Ernie, what's
projection
that?
level.
It seems extraordinary, the numbers, right? The 10-year, last I checked, the treasury was at like 1.7.
Yeah.
And you're saying that in 2017, it's gonna be 4.0. Page 5?
Of the
In the
December
back
report.
table.
And I think Michael can speak to it if you want to. I mean, much of our macro forecast comes from Moody's, economy.com, and they're anticipating significant growth and significant tightening by the Fed.
And mind you, this economic forecast was based on data as available as of mid-November. So I would imagine Moody's and just everyone else has lowered their forecast for Treasury bonds, and I would think we will be doing the same shortly.
I definitely wouldn't invest on this basis.
That's the problem with having the for-profit slot. Somebody's trying to make money somewhere. And then when you do your recession analysis, I have a similar question. Is that, how much does monetary policy play into your recession scenario?
Okay, I'm going to get to the recession scenario in a moment.
Okay.
Although I'm not sure I'm going to answer that particular question, so remind me when I get to it. Okay, can we move to the tax comparisons? If you go back to when we put our report out in December, we made a forecast, and we looked back at the forecast that the administration made in November with the November plan. So we were comparing, when we did compare the administration's November forecast to our December forecast, we were way above them in terms of taxes. For 2016, we were about, was it 2016 or 2017? 17, we were about $1 billion above them. And for 2019, we were like $3 billion above them. So we were way above them. And then the preliminary budget came out, and all of a sudden the comparisons looked very different. We're above the administration for each year except for 2016. 2016 is actually an interesting story. The only reason we're not above them is because the administration recognized a $120 million sales tax payment, which is a pretty big sales tax bill. It was one half of a $240 million sales tax bill. They came about because a major New York City taxpayer had been paying its sales taxes, which are administered by the state of New York, had been paying them to the state of New York, but for some clerical reason, they had not been divided between the state and the city and the MTA for just 5 or 6 years.
Those errors never go the other way, right? The city never gets too much money.
Actually, sometimes we do on the PhDs.
Yeah, sometimes, but So at that point, when the mayor put out his forecast in January, you know, they knew that they were getting this additional 120. It came in 2 checks. So that's in there, and had it been reflected in our forecast, we still would have been above them. We would have been above them for 16 as well. The reason the numbers narrowed so was because property taxes, the administration's forecasts of property taxes and personal income taxes went up by a lot. What you're seeing in that chart is the differences between the 2 forecasts. The reason the property tax went up by so much was because the January preliminary assessment roll came out, and while it had been widely anticipated that values were going to go up by about 5%, they actually, voila, went up by 6.5%. And so that's a great deal of money over the financial plan, and wound up closing much of the gap. Then the other thing that happened was recent personal income tax receipts have been strong. Collections have been strong. Probably has a lot to do with the strength in employment growth in the last quarter. Withholding was very strong, and the administration moved its personal income tax forecast up significantly. I wouldn't be surprised if we once again, you know, if those gaps between the 2 forecasts widen again when we release our report in the first week of March. But for now, there's not as much difference between the 2 tax forecasts as we normally see. Yeah.
So when the assessed value of property goes up, the mill rate doesn't automatically go down?
Not in New York.
Not in New York, okay. It does where I live, that's why I was kind of surprised. I mean, they decide what the budget is, and then, yeah.
There's nothing that stops it. There's no prohibition against lowering it, but
Not that it's a good idea,
the
just.
long-term practice back in the early 1990s has been to observe what's called a frozen rate.
Great, okay.
They haven't adjusted it.
So when you think about the things that have happened since the forecast was prepared, I would have thought at least nationally most of them are kind of negative for revenue, but are you thinking that if the gaps might widen, does that mean that the revenue situation would improve? Did I understand that properly?
Well, certainly property taxes are going to be considerably higher than we had anticipated. And if you flow through those increases, you know, assume that's maintained throughout the forecast period, which I think is a reasonable assumption, although I don't want to constrain our forecast. Mike?
One thing that OMB has been stressing when they first presented this is that they generated their economic forecast and their revenue forecast before the market turmoil came in. So they're wondering if they've overshot. We haven't begun the process yet, and looking at the PIT, which I know the most about offhand, there's some reasons to take it up, but there are also reasons to be cautious about how much to take it up.
Okay. Okay, next slide. So that's the last of the overview. I just wanted to point out that both IBO and OMB are forecasting slower tax revenue growth in this expansion than we had following the 2001 downturn or the 2008 downturn. Those numbers include tax policy changes. So if you look at the really big spikes in 3 and 4, those are increases in 18.5% in personal income and property taxes, temporary hikes in income taxes, assorted hikes in sales taxes that artificially are pushing those bars up. But if you look at 2005, 2006, 2007, those rates are very much higher than we're forecasting now. 2008 looks so small because we're going into the recession, but also because we chose that moment to roll back half of the 18.5% property tax increase. Then we put it back on again really fast. So, don't look at the 9 and 10, but if you look at the early part of this recovery, those numbers, those tax growth numbers are higher than what we're forecasting. So I just wanted to put them in context, which is to say that typically both IBO and OMB are generally quite conservative on our forecasts of tax revenues, and there's good reason for that. Questions? Okay, then let me get into my topic. When he did the preliminary budget presentation, the mayor was really stressed that anything can happen, and there were reasons to believe that we were getting towards the end of this particular expansion. And one of the big reasons he cited were the declines in the stock market recently, which, yes, stock market declines, bear markets, do at times lead to recessions, but not always. Since 1971, there were 20 different bear markets, of which 7 were associated with downturns. So, yeah, that's possible, but not necessarily. Another argument was that this expansion is already looking kind of old, and that's correct. It's been 80 months since the trough of the recession in 2009, and the average expansion post-war is 58 months. But it's not that expansions typically die of old age. And particularly this expansion, there's still a great deal of consumer demand. Consumption is by far the biggest part of output. Lots and lots of consumption got deferred during the downturn. Remember that the U.S. downturn was very severe, although it wasn't that bad locally. It was really terrible nationally. Lots of young people moved back with their parents, didn't start their own households, didn't buy homes, didn't have kids. And we're seeing a lot of that happening now. So it appears that a lot of what would ordinarily have happened at the beginning of early in the recovery is happening later. So we don't see that happening anytime soon. I think more generally we would expect that the expansion would end with some sort of shock, and the list of shocks is endless. The most popular ones lately, everybody's concerned about China, and admittedly been concerned about growth in China for a long time now, but particularly the huge overhang of toxic debt in China and other emerging countries like Brazil. There's a lot of concern over plummeting commodity prices. Low gas prices may be great for consumers, but there's been all sorts of disruptions throughout commodities markets, and some of that has even led to some more increased political instability. So, there are all sorts of things that could, in fact, lead to a downturn, and I'm sure many things that we couldn't even begin to think about. But all of this is to say there's nothing that we see at this moment to make us think that we're more likely to go into downturn next year than we were last year, regardless of what the mayor has said. Next slide. Yeah, sorry.
What's his advantage in predicting a recession? Is he trying to manage expectations, or?
Okay. That's a really good question.
Do any board members want to comment on that?
Oh, yeah. That a lot of people could take that one.
I guess not on camera.
No, okay, fine. I think the mayor's been in a happy position of presiding over a budget that's been in surplus. He's put aside significant reserves, and we can talk about that in a minute if you want. And that's not always a comfortable place to be.
Okay, that's good enough.
And, I think that's part and parcel of what we're seeing from the state.
I think that's a good summary.
Okay. Job losses. Okay, I just wanted to give people an idea of what a recession might look like. There's a lot more information on this in the fiscal outlook report we put out in December. But what we did was we went back to Moody's and said, tell us what a moderate recession would look like. That is to say, a U.S. recession that's not nearly as bad as it was last time, but say better than not nearly as quick as the recession in 2001. And then we used our economic forecast models to generate what we would expect in terms of the path of job losses based upon that U.S. recession. The dotted line is the forecast we made. I should say, this is a spider chart. Every recession starts from 0 job losses, and then the job losses accumulate as you move to the right. So the worst of the recessions that are pictured here by far is the 1990 recession, in which the city lost a total of nearly 350,000 jobs over the course of about 3 years of continual decline, which was god-awful. The 2001 downturn was here pretty terrible also, even though nationally it wasn't so bad. Then you go to the most recent downturn, and you can see the job losses of 141,000 in the most recent downturn. Actually, compared to the other two were actually quite good. And job losses are never good, but the most recent recession was both shorter and less steep than the preceding two. And our model generated a job loss of 168,000 jobs in our hypothetical moderate recession, which is not great, but certainly not nearly as bad as some of the others we've seen. I can give you more details on that. Michael could as well. It's all in the report, but if we have a recession, it's definitely going to generate job losses. And of course, if you're generating job losses and output losses, you're going to reduce tax revenues. And that's what this particular chart shows. Not surprisingly, the property tax is not, our $23 billion property tax is barely affected. And the impacts on taxes come in all the cyclically sensitive taxes, particularly the personal income and business income taxes. Virtually no impact, very little impact in 2016, as you might expect, because we're chugging along and it takes time to turn around. But then big impact coming out thereafter, a $3 billion revenue loss in 17, going up to more than $4 billion a year in 18 and 19. So what to keep in mind here is a loss of about $3.5 billion in tax revenues this year through the end of next fiscal year. Okay, so keeping that in mind, move to the last chart, and I just wanted to put those revenue hits up against the surpluses that the mayor has been very transparently, putting aside for a rainy day. He's increased the size of the general reserve considerably. It's now $1 billion a year for each year. So you'd have $1 billion this year and $1 billion for next year. The Retiree Health Benefits Trust Fund, which ostensibly is to fund retiree health benefits, also in fact serves as the city's rainy day fund. There's about $2.5 billion in that you could draw down over the course of the remainder of this year and next year, as well as a one-time $500 million capital stabilization reserve, which would be available.
What is that exactly?
What is that? We've been asking ourselves that. It's money that was put aside in case they needed it for the capital budget. And that's what we know. It was budgeted for this year, but not for next year. It's our understanding that it will be transferred over to next year. That's what they called it.
All right, but it actually exists.
It's there. Yeah. Yeah.
So the retiree health benefits used as a piggy bank in emergencies.
Yes, or not emergencies, as the case may be.
Right, but then it's not there to pay retiree benefits.
Okay, the cost of retiree benefits is what, $80 to $90 billion in present value terms at this point. It went down. There have been different accounting changes. The controller puts out the number periodically.
I'm sorry, 80 to 90 billion?
Billion, yeah.
Yes.
So I wouldn't worry that much about the 2.5.
Because it's already underfunded.
By a lot. It's not funded in the sense that pensions are funded.
It's funded on a pay-as-you-go basis.
This is the
not
part that's
funded on an
not funded,
actuarial
yeah.
basis. And this is an attempt to move in that direction and create a rainy day fund at the same time.
Which actually puts us ahead of most places because virtually no states and local governments have actually funded it.
No, I'm aware of that. I'm just curious whether New York operates the same way.
Yeah, okay. So those are the official reserves. and money is available. Other funds are likely to be available. I mean, there's the city has been underestimating debt service routinely for quite some time. Likely to be significant monies there in the hundreds of millions of range. There's a reserve for a contingency reserve for federal categorical aid that's topped out at a little more than $1 billion that has on occasion been drawn down. That's a one-time. There's also end-of-year accounting adjustments that Frank could talk about if you'd like. He's behind me, okay. That routinely occur over the course of the fiscal year and sometimes just magically pop up at the end.
Prior year payables.
Prior year payables, yes. But in terms of the stuff that's identified, we've got $4 billion of readily available cash over this year and next, which would be enough to get you through the end of next year, which of course wouldn't do a whole lot for the $4 billion shortfall the year after and the additional $4 billion the year after that.
Can you just talk, I'm pretty familiar with, kind of state responses to those kinds of things. Just talk a little bit about, like, sort of the political process, the sequence of political actions that might occur, how much is executive versus legislative and the timing of how those kinds of things play out. Is it too vague?
Well, the Retiree Health Benefits Trust Fund, to draw down, you need the cooperation of the council. Do you need the council on either the general reserve or the capital stabilization? I don't know.
Part of a modification.
So yeah, they would be part of a budget mod. Okay.
And then to the extent the response involved taxes after that.
Yeah, and that's the big finish here. We've got enough reserves to give us time to respond. And how you feel about there is no way, shape, or form that the city's got sufficient reserves to take it through a downturn. And if you expect the city to have a rainy day fund to do that, you're going to have a lot more sitting around. But it does give us sufficient time for a moderate downturn to be able to fashion some combination of spending cuts, tax increases, assuming cooperation in Albany, to get our act together.
Right, but it's probably true that this is probably the most prepared the city's been in the last 30 years.
Yes. Yeah, and how vulnerable we've seemed in recent weeks has just been amazing to me. I mean, all of a sudden, listening to what's coming out of Albany, those surpluses are looking, yeah. So, on that note.
All right. Okay.
I was going to turn to Beth first to talk about what Beth's capital and infrastructure team has got going on for the preliminary. But if you want to go out of order and talk about some of the Albany stuff now or anything, just jump in. Okay?
Sure. I'll come up here. I don't have slides, so you can so I'm going to talk a little bit about one of the issues our team is looking at, and that's the spending of the Department of Homeless Services. The headline being the mayor has increased funding for the Department of Homeless Services, but we think they still need more money. As many of you may know, the number of homeless families and single adults are at record highs. 14,500 families in shelter in January, 13,000 single adults. That's a lot of people. And so the mayor has been increasing the amount of money to fund DHS over the past financial plans. He increased funding this plan for the current year by $71 million, 63 of which is city funds. And we think that is enough, given where they started, to pay for shelter this year. It brings the DHS budget up to $1.3 billion, which is really big. That's the most they've ever spent, not including rental assistance programs. This is mainly just shelter. How much? $1.3 billion. So we think that that's sufficient for this year. The increase that the mayor did in this plan mainly was for adult shelter. About half of the $71 million is to fund adult shelter beds. The other half is for some various initiatives, not necessarily shelter beds, but some initiatives he's announced this year, including programming for adult shelter. So it had been the policy of the city that single adults who were in a homeless shelter had to leave during the day and go to work, do something else. The city's changing that policy. They're going to allow people to stay in shelter, but they also have some sort of programming for them, so there's some money for that. That was increased in the preliminary plan. There's some money for shelter security, some news about the security in shelters, some money for mental health care services. For a lot of this money, the new initiatives are for single adults. There was no new money added for family shelter beds in this plan for this year. I think that's okay because the mayor actually added a bunch of money for it in the November plan. So for 2016, it seems that the mayor has enough money to pay for shelter. However, for the next fiscal year, 2017, which is rapidly approaching, we think it's fairly substantially under budgeted. At 1 point, so right now we're at 1.3 for this year. The mayor only has 1.1 budgeted for next year, and we think at least an additional 131 million will be necessary to meet the need. The reason the budget is so low for next year is because it's two reasons. Historically, the administration has budgeted less for the next fiscal year in the hope that there will be less homeless people. The mayor has also introduced several initiatives to move people out of shelter during his term. The Linked Rental Assistance Program is the main one. However, this has not had the impact that they anticipated. The administration has had trouble moving people out of shelter, mainly because landlords aren't accepting the vouchers. And this, it's likely caused by the fact that the last time the city had a rental assistance program, it ended abruptly. Nobody wants to be caught in that again. So for those two reasons, and an additional reason actually, the mayor didn't increase funding for 2017, but he actually cut it a little bit for shelter beds. There are two new initiatives apart from the rental assistance programs to move people out of shelter. One is to move families into supportive housing beginning in 2017. Another is to move, I think it's asymptomatic AIDS, HIV positive individuals. It's a rental assistance program specifically for them to move them out of shelter. So while he hasn't raised the amount of money to sort of meet the current need, the administration has cut funding a little bit, anticipating savings from those two programs. We are less optimistic than the mayor that these will move as many people as they think out of shelter. So for 2017, we think that there should be an additional 131 billion. Million. Sorry, billion. Well, let's hope not billion. Million, most of which will be city funds because a lot of that is going to adult shelter, which is solely funded by the city.
The president, I saw it announced yesterday that the president was putting $10 billion to address family homelessness. Is there any expectation that the city will capture any of that?
Yeah, I mean, he specifically mentioned New York, so we hope they will. I think the federal money that comes to the city right now from shelter is through the TANF program mainly. So, and then there's some other block grants, emergency solutions grant, I think it's the name of that's federal money that goes to shelter, but mostly right now it's TANF. So anything additional, and most of that is also going to family shelter. What the city might need more is federal money for single adults, because that's really where the city is picking up the bill.
Are they counting teenagers as part of the single adults, or that seems to be a growing issue?
No, in the numbers I quoted, that's well, it sort of depends. If you're under 8, is it under 18?
Yes.
DYCD has shelter programs. Single adults are just 18 and older. There's also something called adult family, which is another thing. Single adults are 18 or older who don't have someone, the children or a spouse or someone that's dependent upon them. So that's one of the areas we're looking into. We're also going to be looking at the city's organics program. There was a pilot program where there's money added to expand that pilot program.
What is it?
An organics collection program through the Department of Sanitation.
Oh, composting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay.
Organic.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to look at Vision Zero spending. That's also been increased. The mayor has been quite vocal about the
Is that both
success.
on the commercial and the residential side, the composting?
No, that's just on the residential side. And right now it's only in a few areas. They're slowly expanding it though. Yes.
I know one of the discussions was that DHS should be absorbed within another agency. Would that be cost savings to the city in any way?
A lot of what DHS used to do in terms of rental assistance and prevention has already been moved to HRA, and really what's spent by DHS now is just providing shelter. There's some prevention programs, small prevention programs that have been left at DHS, but the majority of those the other programs have already been moved to HRA. HRA has a big budget. DHS has a big budget. I'm not sure how putting them together might work. I don't know. Paul covers HRA, which would be the one to absorb DHS, which actually DHS was part of HRA to begin with, and then was taken out.
I think, the mayor has asked for Commissioner Banks at HRA and Deputy Mayor Tony Shores to do a 90-day review of that, and I think they're getting towards the end of that review period, as I recall, and, but it took a couple of years to actually completely move everybody from HRA to create this agency back in the 90s, the DHS. I think my personal view is you'd lose 2 years trying to put it back together, and it's 2 years you can't afford to lose, but okay. But it's a mammoth bureaucratic challenge to separate agencies, put them back together, especially agencies of this size. So I don't know if anybody has any other view on that, but it's just, I'm not sure that recombining the bureaucracies would actually address homelessness in a better way, but okay. I don't know if
I mean,
anybody-
so much of what DHS is spending right now is what they have to spend to pay for shelters. I'm not sure either what sort of difference it may make.
But I think that report should be coming out soon. Other topics, or?
Yes?
I wanted to ask, as far as the homeless numbers and the cross-referencing on who is on a NYCHA waiting list, and just understanding that 100,000 families are on a wait list for NYCHA, whether or not there's a duplication of the homeless shelter system of families and single adults that could be targeted so that there's this effort of creating affordable housing to deal with what is the federal funding aspect of homelessness poured into perhaps a separate initiative on affordable housing to address these issues, and our asset of NYCHA being the opportunity, because there's this next gen proposal, but is it really going to address what is the homeless issue and the affordable housing crisis?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two things. One, the mayor has reinstituted a bit the priority for homeless shelter residents to move into NYCHA. I think it's 750 beds. So if you're in the shelter system, you get, you're moved up on the list, basically.
Right,
even if you were on the list to begin with, actually, I don't know.
That's
No.
always been a policy where if you're homeless, you get priority preference.
Actually, it wasn't for a while, and they reinstituted it. It had been historically, and then the Bloomberg administration got rid of it, and now de Blasio brought it back to a smaller degree than some people may have wanted. And for affordable housing, any housing for homeless families or single adults really has to have an operating. I mean, most people would say has to have some sort of operating subsidy. It's really very, very low income housing, so there'd have to be a really targeted housing for these particular populations.
And it just goes back to the point of collapsing doesn't really get you the outcomes you're looking for, and you waste a lot of time just trying to administer what is the mammoth project of collapsing agencies, where you lose sight of the outcome you're really trying to reach, and it's just a matter of coordinating what would be efforts and cross-referencing where there's a duplication of cross-pollination of funding and headcount of personnel to be able to create a task force unit that's going to be at the table all synchronized to address what would be this particular crisis we're going through in the city. And I don't see affordable housing development in the NYCHA Next Gen plan to address homelessness, nor do I see the affordable housing plan addressing what would be the homeless crisis. And so therefore all three, if not at the table, coordinating funding and efforts, there's going to be very little impact. So I just wanted to
Certainly been a
understand.
critique of the mayor's plan, yes.
Well, that's not the critique of any one mayor, right?
Right,
It's
right.
always been, it's cyclical.
It's really, there is a high subsidy needed for, usually for homeless adults.
We never change the outcome because we're not properly addressing it in coordination with cross agencies. And so I'm just trying to understand, right, as as IBO investigates this further, because you guys did a fantastic job as far as nailing down the issue of homelessness in our education system. And that was an effort that forced what would be the education department to coordinate with the Department of Homeless Services. And so therefore it pulls, and drives what is a coordination effort that is unforeseen, if not pointed in the right direction of where it is that we're duplicating all these matters and trying to make sure that they're forced to come to the table to work together. So I don't know if IBO is going to, continue to push that angle, but it would be helpful because I know that we are going to see booming development in what would be Brooklyn. And the greatest growth, and anybody can correct me if I'm wrong, of homelessness is occurring in Brooklyn, where you have doubled up families and the homeless system it has been growing with families coming from Brooklyn and the Bronx. It's like competing efforts between the two boroughs.
It is.
But it's where the most development is happening.
Well, I mean, Diana, I think that's the issue at hand right now before the council. If you, as I'm sure you followed yesterday, the protest, affordable for whom? And you're absolutely right. Affordable housing is kind of like a soundbite. What does it mean? Affordable for whom? And typically, it has not gone as low as the level of very low-income people who are in the shelter system. And I think that's the issue. And I don't know whether there's any role for IBO in doing an analysis of the mayor's affordable housing plan. I think it's still under construction and what and who it would reach. But I don't know if there's a role for you all. But
on a smaller scale, one of the relative successes in homeless in the last year or so has been the veterans homeless issue, right? Where the administration made a really significant dent in it. And, maybe the IBO might want to look at that to see why it was successful.
A lot of federal money.
But
So maybe
just
Obama's
to
new
put-
plan?
But just to put that issue out there. But just to publicize that, here's what it takes to have a success.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good
great.
idea, Mark. A little optimism in this field would be, no, it would be welcome, because I think people are feeling so discouraged.
And it's also tractable in terms of research, if we, our contribution to that part of the debate was the prevailing wage part. We're obviously moving on and doing other things now, but to the extent that we can craft things that are small enough to put out there when it's still timely and the debate is going on,
Correct.
is really huge. So, yeah, it's great.
Okay.
So maybe you want to
Let
stop
somebody
before
else
you
move
do,
on, yeah.
more topics.
Yeah.
I think we were going to call on Ray, who's head of the education team next.
So the first issue that I'm going to speak about briefly is something that actually is relatively small in terms of budgetary impact, but is huge in terms of programmatic impact. There have been ongoing problems with the Department of Education's special education student information system that are hampering, among other things, the budget connection is it's hampering the city's ability to obtain Medicaid reimbursement for services provided to eligible students. Census was supposed to solve the documentation problem at the heart of the reimbursement problem.
That's what census is
Is the special education student information system. That's what they call it. Okay, that's the acronym. Okay, the city spent a number of years ago $131 million to develop this system. That was split rather evenly between capital and expense money. The system has been online since 2013. In 2014, the city budget anticipated $117 million in reimbursement, but only $15 million actually appeared. Last year, they also anticipated 97 million, but only 27 million actually appeared. And in the budget for fiscal 16 and going forward, they continue to anticipate $97 million in Medicaid reimbursement. We think this is not attainable, so we'll make an adjustment in our estimates.
Ray, is that a problem with the data collection system?
So,
What's the problem?
Yeah, here's why we think it's unattainable. Among other things, the Department of Education is supposed to provide us for data that we deem necessary to do our work. So for 2 years, they've been unable to provide us with any programmatic information on students receiving special education services. When we met with them in the fall to discuss our memorandum of understanding, the statement was made to us that the data does not exist. We said, you know, CESIS, $130 million, it doesn't exist, okay? They further said to us that when the data does exist, it will not be able to tell us what services children are actually receiving. All it will tell us is what they're supposed to be receiving. This is the huge problem. This is huge, much huger than IBO being unable to get data, as important as that is. And it's huger than the $100 million that they're missing in Medicaid reimbursement. The department at this point has no ability to report to the public or even to know themselves the extent to which students' IEPs, their individualized education plans, are being met. And there is increasing anecdotal and organized information filtering up from the community. Parents of students with special needs are reporting in increasing numbers that their children are not getting the services they're entitled to. So this is a big, big programmatic issue. 2 weeks ago, Public Advocate James brought legal action against the Chancellor and the Department of Education for just this issue. So they're pursuing remedy for this in the courts.
So is the reason that they're not getting anticipated reimbursement because they're not filing for it, because they don't have the information to file for it?
There's a long history here, okay? It goes back more than 10 years. The city used to get more than $100 million a year. There was a federal audit of both the city and state that found the documentation was not there. I mean, I remember back in the old days, they simply did a match of these are the students who were special education. Of these students, here are the ones who are eligible for Medicaid. They'd come up with a number, and that was the filing. But the federal government has increased its requirements. They want the type of documentation that you would have to provide, say, to a medical insurance. You know, who provided the service? When was it provided? What was the duration? It has to be certified by a medical professional who's qualified to provide to do that certification. CESIS was supposed to capture all of this documentation, and the problems have been legion from the system.
Just to follow up on Brian's point, is underneath this issue, is this a New York City only issue, or is this a statewide issue with regard to Medicaid and education spending? Well,
I'm not sure about, I mean, the state got caught up in the original audit. I'm not sure where they are on this. The CESIS is a New York City issue. That was the attempt of New York City to solve the problem. I'm actually not quite sure what's going on in the rest of the state.
We have probably the largest, I shouldn't say probably, we do have the largest. Other counties, other LEAs are having the same issue about how they're doing the documentation. But because of the numbers that we had, we came up with this idea of trying to computerize it. And smaller, I know Yonkers is having a problem now also, but because they have a lot of numbers. It's the issue of trying to document the services. Now, you can take it back to New York City. One of the things that Ray probably was not talking about is there's a whole personnel issue about who is responsible for documenting the services. Inputting the services, and then who signs off on it. And there are some requirements that you need to be a licensed practitioner, for instance, in speech. The person has to have a certification in speech to be able to okay that service is done, even though speech teacher might have provided the service. The speech teacher might not be the person with the high certification that's eligible to sign off on it. So it runs the gamut of different things that happens here. Right. And I don't know what the answers to that one.
So again, just to emphasize, the problem with documentation and getting the Medicaid is our entry point to discuss about this, but the problems are actually much, much greater. It has to do with the system doesn't have the ability to know whether these mandated services are being received or not. Yes?
Could I add, because I remember in the council, in the finance hearing, listening to this and the aggravation of it all boiled down to medical billing coding. And the fact that the Department of Education doesn't have that. And the fact that, you know, if you give a service and that professional has not coded correctly, they will not get paid. And then therefore, the city of New York, who does not provide what would be the reimbursement request at all, whether there was no software or there is software today, it all boils down to what would be a medical billing code inefficiency within the Department of Education because they are not an insurance company. And so who is their managed insurance company to be able to do all that inputting accurately and interface between the professional, the Department of Education, and the federal government, state entities as far as reimbursements are concerned. So, you know, as far as what Ernie was saying, personnel, right? Is this, what unit is responsible in the Department of Education right now that is supposed to comply with that is the question. And are they under head count or no head count? And whether or not they're actually providing what would be the system to function, not just what would be this self-complying for the professional to enter the proper coding when they themselves are not medical billing coders as well.
So part of the issue here, I'll just say very quickly, it goes back to the previous administration. When the problem first appeared, their solution was to develop this software.
Correct.
It wasn't to augment the staff. And that, you know, now we're 2 years into the new administration and it's still the same issue. This is the road that the city went down to try and solve the billing problem, and it hasn't worked.
A lot of litigation risk also, I would assume.
Well, this is why we're suing. So for Public Advocate James, this is one of the reasons why we're suing, and Ray was very helpful to provide us an IBO with the information to be able to do that. IBO wasn't getting the information. We were spending all this money, and we're spending tons of money in city dollars and city personnel trying to fix the system. It's the same thing as like city time.
Yep.
Putting all this money in, and you have city officials and personnel that are trying to do the right thing, but not the system itself is just, it sucks. And who's getting hurt are the children. You know, they're the ones that are not getting the services. You know, we have parents coming into our office that are just fed up and just tired that, you know, their kid has been in schools for 3-4 months, can't have speech therapy, can't have occupational therapy, and all of those services, and those are things that we should be getting reimbursed for. So it's very helpful that IBO was there to give us the information so that we could actually file the suit and put that together. So we really appreciate that.
Who are we suing?
So we're asking for the courts to do an inquiry into the system, into the way that the DOE has been operating. So it's suing the Department of Education, but asking the courts to do a formal inquiry. The city comptroller had done an audit about 2 years ago, I believe, that found about the dollars that we weren't getting reimbursed for. Raised the issue again, but still the city hasn't done anything with that.
Is the issue that the children are not getting the services or that the city's not getting reimbursed?
I mean, it's both.
Both.
The children aren't getting services, that's our main objective, but the city also is not getting those finances that they should be getting.
And the professional who's supposed to give, let's say there's a speech therapist that's going to be allowed, you have to search for that speech therapist. And if the speech therapist has not gotten the written okay, they will refuse to give the service until that, it could be 3 months before the Department of Education approves. And Lord knows where the coding issue begins.
Can I just add one piece to it? I think when, as Ray talked about, when they came up with this system to solve the problem, it also made a fail-safe system that you cannot provide the service for the child unless it shows up in the computer system. So you're in this catch-22, even though as a principal of a school, I might know that this student, because my colleague at the other school is saying this child is entitled to this service. I can't provide that service until I can get the system to allow me to provide the service, which is, and so some of us have said, let's scrap the service. Let's try to service the children. But there's not a way to do it. It's for it.
It sounds to me like the system you need is the same system that Bellevue must use. So why are we not using that?
For part of that, I think that is true, the part that deals with Medicaid, but CSIS is actually broader than Medicaid reimbursement. CSIS is about documenting and storing the, the IEPs for the students. Now, not all, in fact, I would venture to guess that a majority of the services that are delivered through IEPs have nothing to do with Medicaid reimbursement. There's a small slice that's about Medicaid. That's basically speech therapy and occupational therapy, where there's something like a medical service being delivered, and therefore you can go to Medicaid. But CSIS as a system is failing on the documentation of the IEPs and then the documentation of what services are being delivered, regardless of whether they're Medicaid eligible or not.
But I mean, the sort of the concept is the same, is that you have to track every client, whether they're a student or a patient, through the system. And so maybe, maybe those medical systems have something to teach us here.
And I'll add one other thing. We had a hearing this week, or was it last week, on student homelessness with the council. And DOE, we just sued them last week. DOE said, oh yeah, CSIS works to track the homeless students, which is a total fallacy because you can't even track the homeless students as is, but within CSIS, it's very sad that the system continues to hurt the children, essentially.
Okay.
Okay. So this is something I've been hearing a lot more on. This is not a problem that's going to go away. Okay.
So let me just say that we have 10 more minutes until the finish time for our meeting, and the question is, do we want to carry over some of these presentations to the next meeting? Do we want to let Ray discuss more education issues, and that might take us to the
Do you want
time?
to get to
So-
Paul? Or?
It's whatever people want. I mean, we've got, Ray has a couple more issues there.
I was going to talk about the capital budget, but we can skip that if you want.
We can either talk about the capital budget, talk a little bit about what's happening in social services. George can explain the property tax cap proposal if you'd like. Any of those things.
I'll be very, very quick.
And then we'll do social services, and then I think that takes us.
Right.
yeah.
The school construction authority works on a 5-year capital plan. It gets amended every year. We're currently in the 2015 to 2020 capital plan. In January, they announced an amendment to the plan that was first adopted last May. The January amendment adds $1.4 billion to capital spending on the schools, $820 million to capacity, and $600 million to capital investments. By capacity, I mean adding seats. It adds close to 12,000, 11,700 seats, 36% growth. The total in this 5-year plan is now to add 44,000 seats to the school system. No net change in high schools, although they're moving a few things around. 41,000 seats are being added to elementary and middle schools. The biggest additions in terms of numbers are for the western part of Queens, Astoria, Long Island City, Sunnyside, Park Slope, Sunset Park area, Bedford-Stuyvesant in downtown Brooklyn, District 13, and East New York. So a lot of this is concentrated in Brooklyn. And the plan is to have 65% of these seats actually done and filled by 2021 and the rest by 2024.
How does the 44,000 seats compare to the shortfall in terms of need? And also comparison a little bit to some areas in the city that have had long-term need.
Yeah.
A lot of the areas you mentioned are sort of in the more gentrification planning
Right.
area of.
Well, certainly Western Queens has had long-term need, but we're working on that, okay? And when we report on this, we'll show district by district what the current overuse is and how this plan adjusts it. But I don't have an answer for you now, but that's something we will include in our report.
But Jenner, if you could characterize what the administration's been trying to do, I mean, generally they seem to have been putting attempting to put seats, particularly into Western Queens.
Yes, so this is a very long game, goes back to the previous administration. There have been huge investments in capital construction, but even as the city has been adding capacity, overcrowding still continues to increase, okay? So it's an ongoing challenge.
Just remind us, how many seats are there overall?
How many seats?
How many seats
Good
overall?
question.
There are, no, in the system, in round numbers, there are 1 million students in the DOE, and I'm forgetting offhand how many co-located charters are, maybe 40,000 or something like that. So less than 1.1 million, but probably trending towards it.
If you look at the number of seats, there are actually more seats than there are students.
There's a mismatch
It's a
of where the seats
The
are.
problem is,
Some schools are overcrowded. Some schools
right, but
All right.
Okay.
So maybe we can just have 7 minutes on social services. I mean, it hurts my heart, but maybe.
All right, let me quickly mention the kind of things we're working on from the March report. One of them is a look at Thrive New York City, which is the plan that came out in November, which pulls together all these individual proposals that the mayor has made to increase mental health services in New York City. It's now a huge program. It's budgeted for $818 million over 4 years. $333 million of that is proposed in the preliminary budget. The rest of it was already there in the adopted budget. It's a big program. It covers 11 agencies, and there are 54 individual programs. And one of the interesting things about it is that about 3/4 of the new money will come from the city, which is a huge break from the past, because traditionally mental health has been mostly a state purview. So, I'm also going to be taking a look at the public assistance system. When de Blasio came in and he appointed Steve Banks as Commissioner of HRA, he made a radical shift in policy, which was to develop a system which was far less punitive. It's going to be a lot more patience with people in terms of work placements. It wasn't going to sanction them. It was going to work with them. There was going to be a de-emphasis of the WEP program, which a lot of critics found to be kind of useless because it didn't provide any training. And it was going to emphasize things like job training and education. And you can see that it's beginning to happen. You can see that in the numbers. The number of people sanctioned is way down. It's gone from about 20,000 to about 11,000 currently. There is a big drop-off in the number of web placements, and the number of people in education and training has more than doubled. It's gone from like 3,300 to 8,000. Now, the other side of this...
So, Paul, you're going to look at those two things in two different reports?
Right, yeah. Now, when he made this announcement, he warned people. He said this could result in a temporary uptick in the caseload, because if you're going to be sanctioning people less often, they're going to stay on longer. They're going to have to stay on longer to get this education and training. And that, in fact, has happened. When Banks came in April, he immediately started to change the policies. The caseload bottomed out in May of 2014. And over the last year and a half, it's gone from 336,000 recipients to 370,000 recipients. It's an uptick of about 34,000 recipients, or 10%. Now, the downside of that is that costs grant money. So if you annualize out the 34,000 increase, it comes to about 133 million a year, of which about 60 million would be city funds. So it's now a question of how fast his plans are going to succeed, and so that the caseload reaches a peak and begins to come down as predicted. If it goes on a lot longer, it's going to cost a lot more in grant costs.
And have they budgeted for that increase?
So far they have. They're up to about where it is now. If it continues upwards, it's going to become a new need.
Paul, will you be able to track those who are going to the additional education and training into the job market? Do you know?
They don't put out such reports, but we're going to be asking them for that as it goes on, right? Now, they claim that one of the problems with the previous numbers on job placements is that a lot of them were self-placements in the very low-level jobs, and about 1/4 of them ended up back on the rolls within a year. So, okay, other things we're going to take a look at. We're going to take a look at HHC's fiscal status. It's a huge problem. They're projecting deficits that go over $1 billion a year out. We have been told that in the executive budget there's going to be a major announcement of a plan by the city to kind of aid HHC. In the meantime, they've done two things in the preliminary budget to kind of help them in the short term. One is that they've forgiven them about $337 million for fiscal year 16 in payments for things like debt service and malpractice costs. But that's 1 year only. The other thing they've done is that the HHC is facing a cut of about $400 million a year in DISH and UPL payments. Those are the payments that the feds make out to compensate hospitals for taking care of people who are uninsured. And under Obamacare, these are scheduled to go down as the number of uninsured is supposed to be going down, and it is. So HHC was facing a hit of about $400 million a year. Half of that was federal, and half of that was the city match. So what the city has decided to do is, the Fed money is gone, but we'll maintain the $200 million, and we'll turn that into a subsidy. So instead of taking a $400 million hit, HHC will take a $200 million hit on that one. That will become part of the plan. Right, other things we're going to look at, we're going to take a look at the Close to Home initiative, which if you recall 3 years ago was this got a lot of publicity, which is an effort to stop placing juvenile delinquents upstate, to keep them in the city and provide them with better social services. That began to be implemented in September 13, so we're going to take a look and see where that is now. They started out with what they call non-secure placements. These are the lowest risk kids, but they've gotten a lot of pushback from some neighborhoods. And they're just beginning to move to the next level, which is limited secure children. So they may have problems placing them as well. And then finally, we're going to be taking a look at, if you recall in the adopted budget, there was a huge initiative to increase the police force by about 1,300 officers. And the other side of that was they were going to take about 415 officers who were doing desk duty and replace them with civilians. So the civilianization, money was put in for that. That's supposed to take place this year. We're going to take a look and see what the status is there. As of the end of September, nothing had happened, but we're looking to get the latest numbers. Okay, any questions?
Wow, that's great.
We've got issues.
Very ambitious agenda. So I think we do try to end on time. Lisa, when is our next meeting? Is in a couple months or?
No, it'll be May or June typically. Yeah.
Okay. So we can
And-
look forward to that. Michelle, did we use too many acronyms?
No, I don't know. You remember, I'm a native New Yorker, so, and been in government for a long time, and in the environmental world, has more acronyms than any other world, so I got it, thank you.
Okay, any other business, any other questions?
I just want to just highlight something that Diana mentioned also. The work that IBO did on students in temporary housing and the doubling up, I think really helped the conversation at the DOE to really look at how to look at other agencies to get the support, because we've already seen a change. As they started to look at their numbers, they realized they have to provide additional services for students in temporary housing, a little more communication between Department of Homeless Services and the DOE, that students are moving. And we're now looking at trying to change some policies where they used to take students out of school as they went looking for new placements, always new places. So we're really starting to have a lot more conversation. And that all came about from the work that IBO was doing. And they've been doing this for, Ray, what, 2 or 3 years you've been working on this, right?
2 years.
2 years.
There's more to come.
There's more to come, yeah.
Well, that's great. Ray, you can put
And
that
if they solve it
testimonial.
before we come out, that's fine. Okay?
You can put that testimonial on your book jacket. Thank you, everybody. This was really informative, and thank you to the IBO staff for the great work. Okay. Motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn. So bad, I forgot the minutes and I forgot the.